The American Civil War, a conflict that split a nation in two, cost more American lives than any other war and reshaped the United States forever. But how did a country barely 85 years old fall into 4 years of bloodshed? Today, we'll uncover the real story, the events, the people, the turning points that made this war one of the most transformative moments in history. To understand why the Civil War started, we need to look at what the U.S. looked like before 1861. The North and the South were two very different worlds. In the South, cotton was king. The entire economy was built on agriculture, and plantation owners relied on the forced labor of nearly 4 million enslaved African Americans to make it profitable. Their entire way of life, their culture, their economy, it all depended on the institution of slavery. The North, it was on a completely different path. It was industrializing at a rapid pace, factories were springing up, railroads were crisscrossing the landscape, and cities were booming. While racism was still widespread, most Northerners opposed the expansion of slavery into new Western territories, seeing it as a threat to free labor and their own economic opportunities. This growing divide reached a breaking point with the presidential election of 1860, when Abraham Lincoln, a candidate from the newly formed anti-slavery Republican Party, was elected president. Southern leaders panicked. They saw his victory as a direct threat to their way of life and feared he would move to abolish slavery completely. Before Lincoln could even take office, 7 states, led by South Carolina, seceded from the Union. They formed their own nation, the Confederate States of America. 4 more states would join them later. Lincoln refused to recognize the Confederacy. He argued that the Union was indivisible and meant to be permanent. The nation held its breath, waiting for the first move, and then the spark. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter, a federal fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. After a 34-hour bombardment, the Union forces inside surrendered. The Civil War had officially begun. Across the country, there was a rush of patriotic fervor. Young men on both sides rushed to enlist, certain that this would be a short, glorious conflict. They packed their bags, said goodbye to their families, and marched off, thinking it would all be over in a few weeks. Neither side could possibly imagine the horror that lay ahead, or that this war would become one of the deadliest in all of human history. Just 3 months later, the first major land battle shattered this illusion of a quick war. At the First Battle of Bull Run, not far from Washington, D.C., civilians literally packed picnics to come and watch the fight, expecting an easy Union victory. They were horrifyingly wrong. The inexperienced Union Army, facing a determined Confederate force, panicked and fled back to the capital in a chaotic retreat. The South claimed victory, but both sides learned a terrifying lesson. This was not going to be a simple affair. This was going to be a long, brutal, and bloody war. The scale of the carnage was unlike anything America had ever seen. Battles like Shiloh in 1862 were staggering. Over the course of just 2 days, more than 23,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing. That was more American casualties in 2 days than in all previous American wars combined. This was modern warfare, and a shocked nation was just beginning to grasp its devastating reality. At the start of the conflict, Abraham Lincoln's primary goal was simple: to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. He was afraid that making the war about abolition would push the crucial border state slave states that had remained in the Union to join the Confederacy. But as the war dragged on, the moral and strategic realities began to shift. As Union armies marched deeper into the South, they were met by thousands of enslaved people escaping plantations and seeking freedom behind Union lines. These self-emancipated individuals provided valuable intelligence and labor to the Union cause. Generals on the ground reported back to Washington that the institution of slavery was collapsing wherever their armies advanced. The war itself was forcing the issue. Recognizing this seismic shift, Lincoln made a pivotal decision. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were thenceforward and forever free. While it didn't free everyone immediately, it transformed the very purpose of the war. It was no longer just a fight to save the Union, it was now a fight for human freedom. Crucially, the proclamation also authorized the recruitment of African American soldiers into the Union Army. For the first time, nearly 180,000 black men, many of them former slaves, put on the blue uniform. They fought with incredible courage and distinction in battles like Fort Wagner and the Siege of Petersburg, turning the tide both on the battlefield and in the moral conscience of the nation. The summer of 1863 brought a month that would change everything. In the fields of Pennsylvania, the two great armies clashed at the Battle of Gettysburg. For 3 days, the fighting was relentless, culminating in the bloodiest battle of the entire war, with over 50,000 casualties. On the final day, the Confederates, led by General Robert E. Lee, launched a desperate, last-ditch assault known as Pickett's Charge. It was a catastrophic failure. Lee's battered army was forced to retreat, and they would never again be strong enough to invade the North. At the exact same time, hundreds of miles away in Mississippi, another monumental victory was being won. General Ulysses S. Grant, after a long and brilliant campaign, captured the fortress city of Vicksburg. This victory gave the Union complete control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. To major victories, on to different fronts, at the same time, this was the turning point. For the first time, the momentum of the war had decisively swung in the Union's favor. In 1864, the Union pressed its advantage with a new, aggressive strategy of total war. General William T. Sherman launched his infamous March to the Sea. Leading his army from Atlanta to Savannah, he carved a path of destruction 60 miles wide. His men tore up railroads, burned supplies, and destroyed anything that could support the Confederate war effort. The goal wasn't to punish civilians, but to break the South's ability and will to keep fighting. Meanwhile, the new General-in-Chief of all Union armies, Ulysses S. Grant, relentlessly pursued Robert E. Lee's army in Virginia. Grant understood that the North's advantage in manpower and industry meant he could afford to fight a war of attrition. He trapped Lee's army around the Confederate capital of Richmond and the vital railroad hub of Petersburg, settling in for a brutal 10-month siege. The Confederacy was bleeding out, running out of men, food, supplies, and hope. The end finally came in the spring of 1865. After the long siege, Lee's starving and depleted army abandoned Richmond and made a desperate attempt to escape west. Grant's forces pursued them relentlessly, cutting off any chance of retreat. On April 9, 1865, at a small village called Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee formally surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. In a remarkable moment of grace, Grant refused to allow his men to celebrate the victory. As the defeated Confederate soldiers laid down their arms, he told his officers, "The war is over. The rebels are again our countrymen." The terms of surrender were generous, aimed at healing rather than punishing. The Civil War, after 4 long and devastating years, was finally ending. The cost was immense. Over 620,000 American soldiers died, a number greater than in all other U.S. wars combined up to the Vietnam War. Entire cities were in ruins, and the Southern economy was shattered. But out of this destruction, massive change was born. The 13th Amendment was passed, formally abolishing slavery in the United States forever. The 14th and 15th Amendments would grant Black American citizenship and, for men, the right to vote. The war settled the question of secession, solidifying the United States as one indivisible nation. Yet, the struggle for true equality was far from over. The promises of Reconstruction were met with fierce resistance, and the fight for civil rights would continue for generations. The echoes of the Civil War, its causes, its conflicts, and its legacy continue to shape American society today. It was more than a series of battles and generals. It was a defining fight over the very meaning of freedom, a fight that fundamentally reshaped America and whose lessons are still vital for us to understand. If you want to dive deeper into the untold stories, the pivotal battles, and the real voices of the Civil War, explore more of our videos on the topic. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more history.